A dying German shepherd was crawling, barely able to move, dragging her exhausted body through the mud and rain. Her fur was soaked, her ribs visible, and each labored breath seemed to take everything she had left. She was moments away from collapse, but there was something inside her, a spark of life, urging her to crawl just a little further. Her amber eyes locked onto the figure in the distance, a Marine. James Carter. He was out on a routine patrol, scanning the horizon, unaware of the desperate plea for help inching toward him. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain fell in sheets, but still, she moved. It was the kind of moment you never forget. It was a moment that would change everything. As James looked around, his eyes caught sight of the dog, struggling to take another step. He paused. Something wasn't right. He dropped to one knee, the cold wet earth seeping into his uniform, but none of it mattered. This dog needed him. He could see the fear and pain in her eyes. She was begging for help. He reached out slowly, careful not to scare her, and she crawled closer, her movements shaky and weak, as if every inch was a battle. With a soft voice, James murmured, "It's okay. I've got you." He gently placed his hands under her trembling body, lifting her as though she weighed nothing. Her soft whimper was all he could hear as he cradled her in his arms, her tiny body shivering in the cold night air. James could feel her heart racing, the urgency of the situation pulling at his soul. The dog's life was slipping away, but he couldn't give up. Not now. He would fight for her. With every step he took, his mind raced. The nearest medical facility was miles away, and the weather was only getting worse. But he couldn't stop. Not when she was depending on him. As he moved toward safety, he felt a surge of determination. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. He looked down at the German shepherd in his arms. Her breathing was shallow, but she was still fighting. Her body was frail, but her spirit was strong. She was alive, and she had a chance. The storm raged around them, but there was something about this moment, something almost magical. It wasn't just about the rain or the cold. It was about the bond being formed right now, in the midst of this battle for life. A Marine, a dog, and a promise kept. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, James felt a flicker of hope. He could feel her warmth in his arms, a sign that she wasn't ready to give up just yet. She had found him, and together, they would make it through. James Carter carefully moved through the thick mud, holding the trembling German shepherd close to his chest. Her weight was almost nothing in his arms, but her presence was everything. Every step he took was measured. Every breath he took was filled with the hope that he could make it in time. The storm raged on, its winds howling through the trees, the rain falling relentlessly. But he didn't care. He wasn't going to let go of her. His military training had always been about staying calm under pressure, but this was different. This wasn't about a mission or a war zone. This was about saving a life. And for some reason, that felt heavier than anything he had ever experienced. As he moved forward, he could feel the dog's body shaking, her ribs pressing against his arm. She was so frail, and yet, she was still fighting, still alive, and that was all that mattered. He quickened his pace, the urgency in his chest growing. The nearest shelter was just ahead, but the path was treacherous, the mud thick and slippery, the rain blinding. He stumbled once, but quickly regained his footing, not daring to falter. The dog needed him. He couldn't let her down now. He finally reached the small shelter, a dilapidated barn on the edge of the clearing. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He rushed inside, the warmth of the place offering little comfort compared to the coldness of the storm outside. He knelt beside her, gently placing her on the ground. Her breathing was slow, shallow. She was barely hanging on. James quickly grabbed his field kit, trying to stay calm as he assessed the situation. He didn't know what had happened to her, but he could see the signs of severe exhaustion. She was dehydrated, weak, and possibly injured. The cold and the storm had taken their toll. He reached into the kit, pulling out a small bottle of water, and offered it to her, hoping she would drink. To his relief, she managed a small gulp, her eyes never leaving his. He smiled softly, whispering, "You're going to be okay." But deep down, he knew they were in a race against time. The storm wasn't going to let up anytime soon, and he wasn't sure how much longer she could last. He needed to act fast. As he began to tend to her wounds, he realized something. There was a bond between them, something unspoken but strong. She trusted him, and he trusted her. There was no room for doubt. Not now. Not when a life was hanging by a thread. He worked quickly, doing what he could to stabilize her. He didn't have much in the way of medical supplies, but he had his hands, his knowledge, and a fierce determination to save her. He stayed with her, talking to her in soft, reassuring tones, as if the words themselves could heal her. It was strange, comforting, and yet heartbreaking. He had never felt such a strong connection to any animal before, but there was something about this dog. Something in her eyes that told him she was fighting for more than just survival. She was fighting for a chance to live, and that made him fight even harder. James sat on the cold, hard ground next to the German Shepherd, his hands trembling slightly as he applied the last of the medical supplies from his kit. Her condition was still critical, but there was a slight improvement. Her breathing had steadied, and the soft whimpering that had filled the air earlier had quieted. For the first time in hours, James allowed himself to exhale. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the barn, it was strangely calm. The only sounds were the occasional drip of water falling from the roof and the steady rhythm of his own breath. He had been through a lot in his career, faced impossible odds, but this felt different. This was personal. He couldn't just walk away from this, not now. He glanced down at the dog, her amber eyes half-lidded, her body still trembling from the cold, but no longer as violently. He could see the signs of life, the subtle way her chest rose and fell, the faint twitch of her paw every so often. She was still with him, and that gave him hope. James knew he had to keep going, no matter how exhausted he felt. He couldn't stop until he knew she was going to be okay. He carefully moved her closer to the small fire he had managed to start in the corner of the barn, the warmth of the flames a welcome relief against the chill in the air. He wrapped her in his jacket, trying to keep her as warm as possible. His thoughts raced as he looked around the dimly lit barn. This place wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. The storm wasn't going to let up anytime soon, and there was no way he could get her to a vet in these conditions. His only option was to wait it out and hope that she had the strength to survive. The minutes turned into hours, and James stayed by her side, his eyes never leaving her. He could feel the weight of the situation, the responsibility that was now on his shoulders. It wasn't just about saving a dog. It was about preserving a bond that neither of them fully understood yet. James spoke softly to her, words of encouragement and comfort, even though he wasn't sure she could understand. But there was something in her eyes, something that told him she was listening. She wasn't giving up, and neither was he. He gently stroked her fur, a soft gesture of reassurance, as the fire flickered in the corner, casting long shadows across the barn. The warmth was a contrast to the coldness outside, but the storm was still raging, and time was running out. As the night wore on, the dog's condition slowly improved. Her breathing became more even, her body less stiff with the cold. James allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope, but he knew the journey wasn't over yet. He needed to keep moving forward, to keep pushing until they both made it through this. He couldn't afford to rest now, not when her life was still hanging in the balance. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly as James sat beside the dog, keeping her close to the fire he had built. He could feel the exhaustion setting in, his muscles aching from hours of tension and worry. The storm outside had not let up, but in the barn, it was just the two of them, surrounded by the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional whistle of the wind. The German Shepherd's breathing had steadied, her body less stiff, but she was still far from being out of danger. James wasn't about to leave her side, though. He knew that the moment he did, she might slip away. The minutes turned into hours, and James remained vigilant, never once letting his guard down. Every now and then, he would gently stroke her fur, reassuring her that she wasn't alone, that he was still here. He spoke softly to her, even though he wasn't sure if she could understand. It was a strange comfort, the sound of his voice in the stillness of the barn, a reminder that hope was not lost. As the night wore on, James could feel the weight of the storm pressing in from all sides. The wind howled outside, shaking the barn's old wooden walls, but inside, the warmth from the fire was enough to keep them both grounded. The dog's body seemed to relax as the warmth spread through her, and James couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. She was still alive, still fighting. Slowly, carefully, he moved her closer to the fire, wrapping her in the jacket he had been wearing. He needed to keep her warm, to give her every chance to recover. She was fragile, but there was strength in her, a quiet determination that matched his own. They were both in this together. Hours passed, and the fire in the barn began to die down. The storm outside showed no signs of relenting, but James had stopped worrying about that. For now, his focus was entirely on the dog. He didn't want to push her too hard, but he knew he needed to get her moving soon. Her body was still weak, but it was clear she was getting stronger with every moment. As dawn broke, the first light of morning creeping through the cracks in the barn walls, James looked down at the dog. Her eyes were open now, her breathing calm. There was no more shaking, no more desperate whimpering. Instead, she looked up at him with those amber eyes, her gaze steady, almost grateful. James felt a rush of relief flood through him. It wasn't over yet, but it was. The sign he had been waiting for. She was going to make it. With careful movements, James helped her to her feet, holding her steady as she took tentative steps forward. The barn creaked as they moved, but the storm outside seemed to ease just a little. The worst had passed. Together, they slowly made their way to the barn's door. James didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew they had made it through the night. They were both alive, both breathing, and that was all that mattered. The morning sun began to rise, its soft light filtering through the gaps in the barn's weathered walls. The storm outside had finally started to subside, leaving behind a quiet stillness that felt almost sacred. James stood up, his body stiff from the long hours spent on the cold, hard ground, but his heart was light. The dog, now on her feet, was standing next to him, her legs unsteady but her spirit stronger than ever. She looked up at him with those deep amber eyes, her expression calm but filled with a quiet gratitude. James felt a lump in his throat. He had been through countless battles, both in the field and in his own mind. But this was different. This was a fight for life, not just survival. He crouched down slowly, careful not to startle her, and placed his hand gently on her back. Her fur was still damp, but she wasn't shaking anymore. She was calm. She was strong. She was alive. James couldn't help but smile, though it was a bittersweet smile, one filled with relief and a tinge of sadness for everything they had both endured. He whispered softly, "We made it, girl." He stood back up, wiping the sweat from his brow, and took a deep breath. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for now, they were alive. They had made it through the worst of the storm, and he was determined to get them to safety. The barn, as small and unremarkable as it was, had served its purpose. It had sheltered them through the night, kept them warm and safe, and now it was time to leave. He could feel the weight of responsibility settling back on his shoulders. The dog was no longer just a casualty of the storm. She was a companion, a friend, a survivor. Together, they would face whatever came next. James carefully helped her walk, her legs still wobbly but gaining strength with each step. They made their way to the barn's door, James holding her steady as she took her first cautious steps into the daylight. The air outside was crisp and fresh, a stark contrast to the damp, suffocating air of the barn. The storm had left the ground muddy and slick, but the sun was starting to break through the clouds, casting a golden light on everything it touched. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start. James glanced down at the dog, her fur ruffling in the breeze, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of hope. They had made it this far, and they weren't going to stop now. The journey ahead would be long, and it would be difficult, but they had each other. And that was all that mattered. He took one last look at the barn behind them, a symbol of the trials they had just overcome, and turned his focus to the road ahead. With the dog by his side, he was ready for whatever the world would throw at them next. As James and the German shepherd made their way across the muddy field, the sun began to rise higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the landscape. The storm had finally passed, and the air was filled with the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. James could feel the weight of exhaustion in his bones, but there was a lightness in his heart now. The dog, still a little wobbly, walked beside him, her steps growing steadier with each passing moment. They moved in silence, both of them lost in their thoughts, but the bond between them was undeniable. It was as if they had been through something together that no words could ever fully explain. James kept a watchful eye on the dog, but he could see the strength returning to her. Her once dull eyes were now bright, and there was a determination in the way she moved that reminded him of his own perseverance. They had both been through the worst, and now they were on the other side, ready to face whatever came next. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps was the only noise in the quiet morning. James felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. He wasn't sure where they were headed or what their future held, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he didn't feel so alone. He glanced down at the dog, who looked up at him with her steady amber eyes, and he smiled. There was something comforting about her presence, something that made everything seem a little more bearable. They continued their journey, walking through the quiet countryside, the world slowly coming to life around them. The birds had begun to sing, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. James couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the world, the way it seemed to renew itself after every storm. It was a reminder that no matter how hard life got, there was always hope for a fresh start. The dog trotted beside him, her tail wagging slightly, and James felt a surge of gratitude for her resilience. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, standing strong beside him. They didn't have a destination, but they had each other, and for now, that was enough. As they walked, James realized something. He didn't need to know exactly what the future held. As long as they kept moving forward, they would find their way. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been alone. And that was all that mattered. The road ahead was still uncertain, but James was no longer afraid of what might come. He had found something in this journey, something worth fighting for. And he knew, without a doubt, that as long as they were together, they could face whatever lay ahead. The day moved on quietly, the sun climbing higher in the sky, casting its warmth over the land. James and the German shepherd continued their journey, the fields around them stretching wide and open. The road ahead remained unclear, but for the first time since the storm had hit, James felt a sense of calm settling over him. His body was still tired, every muscle aching from the exhaustion of the past hours, but his spirit had been lifted by the quiet companionship of the dog at his side. She walked with more confidence now, her legs no longer shaky but strong, each step purposeful. James couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for her. She had come so far, just as he had. They both had been through so much, and yet they were still standing, still moving forward. The journey ahead would be long, but they would face it together. It was an odd feeling, this companionship between man and dog. They hadn't known each other long, but the bond they shared was deep, forged through shared hardship and the simple understanding that they needed each other. James glanced down at the dog, who now trotted beside him with a steady gait. Her fur shone in the sunlight, the dampness of the storm no longer clinging to her body. She looked strong, determined, and full of life once more. It was almost as though the storm had been a test, one that they had passed together. The land around them was still and peaceful, the only sounds the soft crunch of their footsteps on the gravel road and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm that had raged through the night. James took a deep breath, the fresh air filling his lungs, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt at peace. He had been so focused on surviving, on getting through each moment, that he hadn't allowed himself to truly feel the calm that was now surrounding him. It was a strange feeling, but a welcome one. The dog stopped for a moment, sniffing the air as if to take in the world around her. James stopped beside her, watching her carefully. There was something in her eyes, something that told him she was ready for whatever came next. She looked at him, her gaze steady and unblinking, as if asking for permission to continue. He smiled softly, reaching down to gently pat her head. "Let's go," he said quietly. And with that, they continued on their way. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with each step they took, James felt more confident in the journey they were on. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were living. Together, they were stronger than they had ever been alone. The future was still unknown, but James wasn't afraid anymore. As long as they had each other, they could face anything. As they continued down the road, the world around them felt vast and open. The fields stretched endlessly under the wide sky, and the sounds of the storm had become nothing more than a distant memory. James glanced down at the German shepherd trotting beside him. Her steps were steady now, her coat glistening in the morning sunlight. She was strong, more confident than she had been the day before, and James couldn't help but feel proud of her. It had been a long night, and they had both come through it, side by side. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but James knew that as long as they stuck together, they could handle whatever came next. There was no longer a sense of urgency, no panic about survival. Now, it was just the two of them, walking forward into a new day, ready to face whatever the future held. The road ahead wound through the countryside, the occasional farmhouse or barn breaking up the endless expanse of fields. James felt a deep sense of peace as he walked, the quiet of the morning settling over him. It was a kind of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time, one that came from knowing that no matter how difficult the road had been, they had made it through. They had fought together, and now they were stronger because of it. As they walked, James noticed how the dog seemed to find a rhythm, her tail wagging slightly as she moved. It was a small thing, but it made him smile. She had been through so much, and yet here she was, still moving forward, still with him. She was more than just a survivor now. She was a companion, a friend. The bond between them had deepened, and James knew it would last for a long time. The sun continued to climb in the sky, casting long shadows over the road. James felt the warmth on his face, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, he allowed himself to relax. The constant tension of the past few days began to ease, and he realized just how much he had been holding on to. The storm, the fear, the uncertainty, all of it was fading into the background, replaced by something new, hope. They had made it through the worst of it. Now, all they had to do was keep moving forward. As the road stretched out in front of them, James knew there were still challenges ahead, but he wasn't afraid anymore. He had found something worth fighting for, something that mattered more than anything else. And as long as they were together, he knew they would be okay. The future was still a mystery, but it no longer seemed as daunting as it once had. With the dog by his side, James felt ready for whatever came next. Days passed, and the journey became less about survival and more about rebuilding. The once uncertain road ahead now felt like a path they could navigate together. James looked down at the dog, who was walking steadily beside him, her tail wagging slightly with each step. It had been weeks since that stormy night, and with every day, she grew stronger, just as he did. The bond between them had deepened, their connection unspoken but undeniable. They had both come through the storm, each of them scarred in their own way, but each of them ready to face the future. The world around them was changing too. The fields that had once seemed endless were now alive with color, the first signs of spring breaking through the earth. It felt like a new beginning, a fresh start for both of them. James had found a small cabin on the outskirts of a quiet town, far from the chaos he had known in his past life. It wasn't much, but it was home. The dog had claimed a corner of the living room as her own, curling up there at night, while James worked on fixing up the cabin, repairing what needed to be done. The simple routine of everyday life was comforting. There were no more battles to fight, no more storms to survive. It was just him and the dog, living each day as it came, with no more urgency, no more fear. They had both earned the peace they had found. As the days turned into weeks, James began to realize something. He hadn't just found a dog that needed saving. He had found a companion, a friend who had taught him more about resilience and hope than he could have ever imagined. The dog had given him the strength to move forward, to let go of the past, and to embrace a future that no longer felt daunting. She had saved him as much as he had saved her. One afternoon, as they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sun dip below the horizon, James found himself reflecting on everything they had been through. It had been a long road to get here, but they had made it. They were both still standing, still walking forward. And for the first time in a long while, James felt truly at peace. He looked down at the dog, who was resting her head on his knee, her eyes closed in contentment. She had come from a place of darkness, a place of survival, but now she was here, with him, in a place of light. It was a testament to the strength of their bond, and to the power of never giving up, no matter how hard the journey might seem. As the last light of the day faded, James whispered softly, "We made it, girl. We really did." The dog opened her eyes and looked up at him, her gaze steady and calm, as if to say that yes, they had. Together, they had made it through the storm and into the peace they had always deserved. In this touching story of survival, two unlikely companions, a Marine and a German Shepherd, form an unbreakable bond as they face a life-or-death situation. Amidst a raging storm, the Marine finds the dog in a state of despair, barely holding on, and steps in to provide the help she desperately needs. As they struggle to survive the harsh conditions, the dog slowly recovers, and their bond grows stronger. This is not just an animal story. It's a testament to the power of resilience and companionship between humans and animals. Throughout their journey, the Marine proves that true strength lies in selflessness, and the dog's unwavering spirit shines as she begins to heal. Their story is a reminder that, in the world of animal stories, even the most desperate moments can lead to a beautiful transformation. With each passing day, the Marine and the dog face new challenges together, learning from each other and growing stronger in the process. The journey is filled with moments of hope, reminding us all that no matter the odds, kindness and care can lead to healing and survival. In this emotional animal story, the bond between the Marine and the dog illustrates how, sometimes, it is the quietest acts of compassion that save lives, as they both navigate through hardship and emerge stronger. As their journey continues, it is clear that the connection they share is a beacon of hope in the darkest of times, and their story will resonate with anyone who believes in the power of animal stories to touch the heart. Character 1 is a white male Marine, around 30 years old, with short brown hair and a rugged, muscular build. He's wearing a military green jacket and combat pants, standing tall and confident, with a serious expression. The camera angle is directly in front of him, capturing his stern, determined look. No cartoon, no CGI, no illustration.